questions. And yeah, and the recording, it will be trained on the speaker only, so it's not going to show everybody. Um, and then the recordings will be made available on our website. There's a page on the Mindfulness Center of Atlanta website called Mindfulness for the Moment. And at the bottom there, there's a link to resources, and that will have the videos from each week, and you can go back in time and look at that. As well as some other resources. If maybe I make mention of a book or something, we might stick a link on there for that as well, just to kind of help you along. Um, Today's format, it will actually going to start with a practice, and then we'll have some time after that for some conversation, and we'll kind of open it up. And I said this last week that we're going to reserve the fourth Wednesday or the last Wednesday of the month for just kind of open conversation and maybe responding to questions that we're picking up in the chat over the previous few weeks. And so we'll do some of that today and experiment with that a little bit. And so the practice I wanted to start with today is walking meditation. Um, and, you know, walking, all these practices, whether it's sitting meditation or walking meditation, or the body scan, which we'll do at some point, they're all engaging the same intention that we are doing with what we often are more familiar with, maybe with sitting meditation. But all the mindfulness practices are applying the same principle, which is to practice this present moment awareness without judgment. And so in walking meditation, we're paying attention in the moment, and what we're using for kind of a present moment object of awareness is the experience and the sensations of walking. It's kind of mindfulness in motion, where you might think of sitting meditation as mindfulness and sort of stillness or relative stillness. So if you're not familiar with walking meditation, and even if you are, it's worth just kind of reviewing, you know, some of the kind of guidelines around it. So this kind of walking is different than the more functional walking, you know, to get from point A to point B. This is just walking for the sake of practicing, of meditating. And so generally speaking, we usually walk just back and forth in a short lane, 10, 12, 15 feet, that kind of a thing. And you pick your own sort of walking path to do that. If you're in a spot where you can kick off your shoes, even better, you know, because you get to really get some feedback on the bottom of your feet as you walk. And you begin by standing at one end of the walking path with your feet firmly planted on the ground. And then, you know, just allow the body to kind of settle into just standing there. And you could even, if it's comfortable or okay for you, to close the eyes for a moment and just center yourself and feel your body just standing on the earth. And feel the contact points on the bottom of your feet. And you know, the bottom of the feet have a lot of sensors on their nerve endings. The most concentrated area of nerve endings in the body are on the bottom of the feet. So that gives us a lot of feedback, you know, in the present moment. And then when you're ready, you just begin walking nice and slow. And you can experiment and adjust the speed so that it's not, you know, overly slow where you kind of lose your balance. But the point is we're not rushing to get somewhere. And so we just walk back and forth. And I'll just show you what I mean by that. You know, you just kind of get to a spot and then just stand for a moment, and you can let your arms just hang alongside the body, or, you know, I sometimes take hold of one wrist with my hand behind me, or some people like to interlace their fingers or even take the palms together in what's sometimes called the prayer posture, you know. And then, you know, after you feel that sense of groundedness, just begin and notice the shifting of the weight and the sensations of picking up the heel and taking the other foot down and whatever else that you notice. And when you get to the end of the lane, you just pause and pivot, turn around and walk. And it's just back and forth and back and forth. in the Chinese language, where many of these practices really originated, the term I think is kin hin, and it's the more traditional meaning of this kind of walking is to go back and forth and back and forth. And they say like the needle in a loom. You know how you would go back and forth and get to one end and just come back again. And I like that imagery, you know, because it's it's suggesting that when we go back and forth, that something is really happening for us. We're creating something, you know, like you might be creating a blanket or a carpet or something on the loom. Um, so if you're not able to walk, or you're not in a place where that's okay for you to do at this time, then you could also just, you know, opt for sitting through this time and do sitting meditation. And like I said, it's the same practice. It's just a different iteration of it, but it's the same basic practice, that we're paying attention in the present moment on purpose and without judgment. All right. So we'll walk for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll ring the bell once just to kind of invite us back to our seated position where we'll kind of regroup. Okay, so why don't you get to a spot now? And you don't need a lot of room. If you only have like a little 6-foot spot or 4-foot spot, that's fine. You know, you're just weaving back and forth. And just establish yourself standing on the earth, and note that you're standing on the earth and feel that in the body. And when you're ready at your own pace, just begin, you know, noticing shifting of the weight, lifting of the foot, stepping, picking up of the heel, whatever else you notice in terms of the physical sensation of walking. And remember, we're not analyzing it, you know, we're trying to figure out what's happening and all. It's just direct experience, which is bringing us back to the present, our direct sense experience of walking and pausing and turning. And when the mind wanders off of you noticing this present moment experience of walking, then just recognize that the mind has wandered off to the past or the future or caught up in a storyline, whatever it is, and simply, without any fuss or struggle, just release whatever it's gone off to and do your best just to come back to the sensation of walking. And it's okay if that happens 100 times in this brief time of walking meditation. It's just 100 opportunities to bring it back to the present. And in so doing, strengthening your capacity to not only recognize, but also shift and come back. boredom may happen. That's just another mind state, a thinking. I think I'm bored, and therefore I feel like, I don't like it or whatever. So just recognize that as well as any other thought and acknowledge that, and then do your best just simply to come back. And we're not trying to freeze the mind in the moment. The moment isn't even one moment, it's constantly moving. And we're just doing our best to track with that and noticing when we've gone off somewhere. And it's the coming back that's as integral to the practice as as staying with the moment. So there's always this kind of dynamic, going off, coming back, going off, coming back. And if we can do so with a kind of gentle touch, a non-judgmental awareness, a friendly and kind awareness, even curiosity about what's happening, then we don't have to get caught up in a struggle. We're not wrestling down any kind of thought or pushing away any kind of emotion. So use a light touch. Now let's return to our seated position and come back to the screen. And just take just a minute or two to settle into stillness. Notice that transition from moving meditation to stillness meditation. And notice how the body attempts to settle. Feel that. Settling of the body, settling of the mind. Here's a poem by Rob Bell. Walk, don't run. That's it. Walk, don't run. Slow down, breathe deeply, and open your eyes, because there's a whole world right here within this one. The bush doesn't suddenly catch on fire. It's been burning the whole time. Moses is simply moving slowly enough to see it, and when he does, he takes off his sandals. Not because the ground has suddenly become holy, but because he's just now becoming aware that the ground has been holy the whole time. Efficiency is not the highest goal for your life. Neither is busyness, or how many things you can get done in one day, or speed, or even success. But walking, which leads to seeing, now that's something. That's the invitation for every one of us today and every day, in every conversation, interaction, event, and moment. To walk, not run. And in doing so, to see a whole world right here within this one. So we have about 8 minutes or so before our time ends here, and we've been receiving some questions in the chat. And actually, for this first time that we kind of look at questions, I'd like to try doing this a certain way where I don't want to necessarily be the answer man for this, although I do have some specific answers, but we'll get to some of those. We may not get to all of them. But I wanted to start with there were some general questions that kind of came up a couple of times that I would love for us to respond to as a community. So I'm going to pose like 3 questions that kind of had common themes, coming up over a couple of times. And then whichever one sort of speaks to you, you could then share a response to it. And this is not about being right or wrong on answering a question. And it's not, the expertise is in our own experience. So just share from your own experience. So here's some questions. What do you do to be more consistent in practicing? What do you do when you want to be more consistent in your practice? And the second question, what challenges have you experienced around mindfulness meditation practice? And how have you dealt with those challenges? You're committing to a practice and then you run into challenges with that. How do you deal with that? And then the third thing is, what benefits have you found? What have you noticed in practicing? What have you experienced as what we might broadly call a benefit? Okay, so first question, and you can just pick one of these if you feel moved to kind of respond to it. What do you do to be more consistent in the practice? What are the challenges that you experience in the practice and how do you deal with those, or have you dealt with them? And then what benefits have you found? And just, you can raise that virtual hand, or you just raise your hand, or just unmute yourself. We'll kind of, Chris and I will be looking around and just pop in and let us know kind of how you might respond to any of those 3 questions. Remember, you're not needing to give an absolute, yeah, or Patty, go ahead. Let's see, get you muted.
Hi.
Hey,
I'm loving this group. I think this is my 3rd time, so thank you.
then you've been here every
I
time.
wanted
'Cause
to talk.
we only started up a few weeks ago, so you've come
Oh,
every week, so
okay.
you got a perfect record.
Thank you, Mark. And perfectly perfect, right?
Yes.
So benefits. Without getting too much into outside issues, what I would say is that a lot of people around me have been very stirred up, upset, all kinds of things about what's going on in the country and the world. And I'm finding that I'm not joining them as much in that. So I feel a more pervasive sense of being grounded and calm and accepting. And I think my meditation practice is has a lot to do with that.
Thanks, Patty, for sharing that. It's so important, you know, and sometimes we hear around meditation circles, you know, that term equanimity, a certain kind of calmness, you know. And we also know uh, in some of the research that mindfulness practice helps us, our view to expand out, to widen, so we're not caught in that very reactionary kind of narrow view. So that sounds like that's in evidence for you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, who else? Yeah, go ahead, Clarissa.
Well, I was really struck by that first question because um, I couldn't even tell you how long I've been meditating because I've been meditating off and on for a long time. And for me, my immediate reaction to the question was, you know, showing up, even if how do you make your practice more consistent? Maybe your practice isn't going to be consistent, just like when you do practice, you know, your thoughts might go off and you might go off into other paths, but you come back. And I think that it's that idea of coming back. You might not be able to stay for very long. You might not be able to, you might be able to practice or try to practice for 5 minutes. Maybe you have only the intention of practicing, but that attempt to come back is everything, it seems to me, and not saying, oh, I'm going to practice for 3 hours today, or I'm going to make sure I practice every day for half an hour. I mean, I'm not sure that I can do that for myself, but that I am drawn back, that I come back, even if I can't stay here for very long, knowing that there's a place where I can look for that calmness, that centeredness. That's enough for me.
Mm, mm. Thank you for that, Clarissa. And I love how you responded to that because I was thinking like, how do I be more consistent? Like, more than once a week or something, consistency, Um, but you're talking about also inside the practice, there's consistency. When I'm sitting, am I am I working with that, like coming back and being consistent each time my mind goes off to bring it back? And maybe it doesn't happen every single time. You might spend 20 minutes and you wrote a book in your head or something instead, but yes, there's consistency in the practice. So there is consistency about overall how frequently am I coming? And we know repetition is so key in new learning. And we think that's responsible for at least some of the changes, the brain changes that we see in practitioners, especially over time. So there's that, coming back to it each day or many days and that kind of, and then there's that, am I consistent inside of it, or am I just wandering the whole time and, not really practicing in a sense, even though I dedicated the time. So speaking of time, unfortunately, we're at time, and I want to really be consistent in that way. Of this, we meet for 30 minutes. There are other questions. We'll come back to this. We had some other very more involved questions too. Well, not that these aren't involved, but some where we want to like kind of raise some of the research and all too. There were questions about addiction, about ADHD, about light therapy and mindfulness, about using music around mindfulness. So there's a lot of interesting questions. So we'll come back to that. Maybe next time we'll look at some of those other ones as well. So really appreciate all of you being here. Feel free to, as you leave, drop something in the chat, a comment or a question that we'll collect all that, and that will help guide us, and even suggestions too. Like, Mark, don't talk so much or whatever, we're open to all that. We'll just get rid of that chat, but Anyway, let's all unmute so we can say goodbye to each other until next time.